So I'd like to welcome everybody to this educator session. We have a range of educators in this session. So we have vision teachers, we have classroom teachers, and we have education professionals. So I'd like to welcome you, and I'm really hoping that today we'll be able to take away some really great things from this session. Okay, next slide, please.
I don't want more video. I don't want.
Claire, could we please have the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so could I ask again, please, that everybody just put themselves on mute? I'm not sure if I can mute everybody. Let's see. All right, thank you. Okay, so I've chosen today to talk about communication. I think that communication is a super large part of our role. So, you know, communication is used and related to every single human activity that we do. We use communication, we teach communication and how to do it to our students. And of course, we talk communication. So I'm really hoping today that if we can share our ideas, that definitely we're here today to improve outcomes for students with vision impairment. And we'd also like to obviously improve our practice. Next slide, please. Claire, may I please have the next slide?
It's on my screen, hasn't it come up?
Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have the plan for today's session. It will be split into two topics with some questions at the end. So the first topic that I'd really like to focus on is the communication with our students, and to look at some really effective and innovative ways that students who have a vision impairment can advocate and communicate their vision needs. Then for the second part of the session, I'd like to talk about us as colleagues and to look at some really effective ways that we can communicate with people of all people styles. And then we'll definitely have some open time for questions and for sharing our knowledge with each other at the end. Next slide, please. So what do we want to take away from today? I always like to, when I have a professional learning, I really like to have some usable things that I can take away. So today I'm hoping that you'll get some ideas, just a couple of little technology skills and the resources, which I think are the most important thing. So a couple of the technology things I'll be speaking about, you'll be provided with some links to the how-to guides on those technology things that we're doing. And you'll also receive a people styles pack, which will be explained later on, and that's to do with people styles. Next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. Mine hasn't moved.
Yeah, I know. It's not moving on. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is that
fantastic? Thank you. Yep, that's great. Thank you. So first of all, we're going to look at communicating with our students and how they communicate. And I'd really like to point out that this is by no means meant to take place of face-to-face interactions. We know how important they are with our students, but I think we can't deny that there are alternative ways, particularly in the last 10 years, technology has blown up. And there are so many other ways that we can communicate and get our students to communicate that are just as effective. Next slide. Thanks, Claire. Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at some barriers to advocating and communicating. And I think it really comes down to personal fears of our student. At times, they don't want to look different. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to be embarrassed. And that can lead to a low self-esteem or a lack of knowledge about their own vision impairment and a lack of opportunity. And at this point, I'd just like to refer to the literature, and that this particular piece of literature from Orman, the author of the Expanded Core Curriculum Essentials. And she states, that without structured intervention to learn self-determination skills, children with vision impairment may be at risk of remaining dependent on others for life. So of course we don't want that. We want our students to be independent. And I thought that this diagram on the left was particularly relevant. I'd like to start with the red arrow in the middle. And I feel like that is a lot of the time our students. They know their barriers, but they're not willing to speak up. So they go underground, come out the other side, they accept that standard size print, or they sit in that classroom where the lights are switched off and they can't see and they don't say anything, and they just keep going as usual. I find that the yellow arrow on the left, I find that that's often us as vision teachers. We would tend to skip around the barrier and fix everything for them. And that can be great in the short term, but in the long term, it's really not what we want for our students. And really what we want for our students is the blue arrow, and we want them to burst through their barriers and be confident and independent within themselves to communicate their vision needs. Next slide, please.
I'll agree with that.
Sorry, Natalie.
Well said, well said.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to look at some advantages to advocating. And again, I'm going to refer to Orman's research. And Orman states that when successfully developed, self-determination allows individuals to make choices and exercise control over the direction of their lives. So of course, when we have that, we'll get improved self-confidence and well-being. The students will have empowerment and a really strong sense of self. It will improve their knowledge, their own knowledge of their vision impairment. They will gain independence from that. And that can in turn lead to improved academic and social results too. If their needs are taken care of, they don't need to focus on reading the small size print, they can focus on learning the content. And often that provides a bit of a sense of student relief to them. If they know, once they know that the teachers know that the lights need to be left on, or that they're receiving the certain size print size, they no longer have to worry or have that, oh, someone's going to know that I'm different. It's quite often a relief for them. So the three things that I've got on the bottom of the screen, and I think this is super important for communicating, is that the way that the students do it, or the way we'd like them to do it, it needs to be age appropriate. It must be individualized to the student. And we must know the audience, and that's to us to know our student really well and what they would be willing to do and what they would be interested in doing, and also for them to know their audience of who are they communicating to. Is it the teachers? Is it their peers? Or is it another group of individuals? So we're going to move on. Next slide, please. And we're going to look at some of the ways that are innovative that we can advocate and communicate. So the first way that I thought of was through iMovie. So an iMovie filmed on an iPhone or similar, students can inform others about vision impairment, class adjustments, technology they're using, and the clips can be really easily joined together and added with music and imported into many, many formats. Now, an example of when I've used iMovie is I've used it with a Year 10 student of mine. And we sort of did broke it down into little segments and did the who, what, when, where, and why of vision impairment for him. And that enabled him, because he used to get very nervous and anxious about speaking to people face to face. And although I 100% realised that that's important, this was a good way for him. He felt comfortable with me to film little segments. He listened to them back, refilmed them till he was happy with them. And then we popped them all together, which led on to the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is YouTube. And we were able to upload his iMovie to YouTube. And at this point, of course, with the relevant school permissions and videos to publish and permission that you need for that. But we were able to upload that to YouTube as an unlisted video. So what that enabled us to do was that only the contacts, the people that we wanted to that had the link, only they could see the video. And so we made his iMovie, and sent the link to all of his subject teachers so that they were able to learn more about him and his vision needs. Another idea that I thought of was tips of the week. So our team with our students, at times we write, with our student, we write 10 vision tips, and we've asked the staff admin to upload them so that it appears each Monday on the school-based management system. So such systems as Central or Millennium, I'm sure there's a million others, I'm just not aware of them. And we try to make it fun. So you can do it with primary school, high school. So it might be something as simple as, can you keep the light switched? Oh, sorry, I'm getting feedback there. Keep the light switched on, or remember to write in blue or black texter, or it could be drop my work into Google Classroom. It could be just something else to remind the teacher. Sorry, I think someone's got their sound switched on. It's only I'm hearing myself back. Thank you. So it's just another way that you can communicate the vision needs of, I'm getting a lot of feedback, sorry. Can people please just ensure that they're on mute? Thank you. It's just another way for, you know, students' vision needs to be known without necessarily the student having to speak up front to others. Okay, moving on to QR codes, and this is one of my favourite ones. I think you can have a lot of fun with QR codes. I think they've sort of made a big comeback with the COVID-19. A lot of restaurants and things and lots of places you visit are using QR codes. And I think that people don't actually realise how simple they are to actually use. So a QR code is known as a quick response code, and it can be really easily embedded with a link to a video, an audio or a picture about the student's needs. So QR codes, they can be printed as stickers or they can be used electronically. The students can stick them onto paperwork and they're easily scanned using standard cameras on most phones. So I'll just give you an example. This is not my personal idea, but I have seen it used and I thought it was particularly effective. A school that I went into, there was a student with a vision impairment and the high school setting, and the students were picking off the yellow paint that was on the poles. And obviously that's not ideal because it's really important that it stays on there. So a QR code was made on stickers and stuck onto the yellow poles so that when these curious high school students walked around, oh, there's a QR code, wonder what that links to. And it linked to a video as to why there was yellow paint on the poles and how important it was that it stayed on there. So I think that was just a really innovative way that you can really communicate using technology, a range of things about the student. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. Next slide, if it will move. Thank you.
I'm not sure about this.
Okay, so I thought that if you don't have experience with a QR code, we can try one. So if you have your mobile phone nearby, you can open the camera, you can point the camera at the QR code as though you're about to take a picture of it, but don't actually take the picture. And a pop-up should appear at the top of the screen. And if you touch or click on the link to the pop-up, it should take you through to YouTube and you should see me in a small video. So I'll give you 30 seconds to try that. And maybe if it works, you can, you know, pop it into the chat that it worked. And Kim Barber, that's a fantastic idea to put them on as temporary tattoos on classmates. I love it. Fantastic. So I'm getting some feedback that a few people have been able to get it. And in case you're wondering, oh, I couldn't do a QR code, that's not, you know, it's too much for me. I'm actually going to provide you with some how-to guides of how to upload something to YouTube and then how to create a QR code. And although it seems like it would take hours and hours, it's actually really, really quick. Okay, so if I could have the next slide, please, Claire. Okay, so the last few ways that I'd like to talk about to advocate and communicate, I think probably most people would have heard of Kahoot. So it's a game-based educational learning platform, and I know that a lot of subject teachers, particularly in high school, use it to do multiple choice questions about content and things like that. So we thought, why not do it about the student? So with your student, you could design 10 questions or 5 or however many they wanted to design with the student with multiple choice answers. And then you can send the quiz to the class team.
Yeah, 5:30. I got it wrong because it started late.
Sorry, somebody is not on mute.
I wonder if Lynette could mute herself, please.
Thank you.
Oops.
Lost my train of thought. So teachers will always, you could send the link to a subject teacher. They could participate in the quiz, and then I think you should always follow it up with a summary at the end. And after each quiz, they can earn points by doing the quiz. And at the end of each question, the correct answer always does come up, and you have the option to write a little sentence after the answer. So, you know, an example that we've used, the student said, to the teacher as a question, where should I sit in the classroom? Centre front, on the right, on the left, or in the corner? So they can make it as fun as they want, they can make it as serious as they want. And then of course at the end for this particular student, the answer came up, always centre front. This is because this is the best position for me to see the board or something like that. Okay, audio and MP4. So some students are not keen on being recorded for video or may not want to make an iMovie. Quite often our students are most comfortable talking about their vision with their vision teacher. So I guess a different way that you could do it is have a question and answer or a conversational interview with your student just as an audio. I like to use the app Voice Recorder and Editor by TAP Media. I find it really easy to use. You can stop and start your audio whenever you like. And then when you want to send it to yourself, it's as simple as pressing export, select MP4, and you can email it straight to yourself. And then from that, you can forward that email, you can save it on your computer. But I know that I'm very aware that there are thousands of recording apps, and you might have one that you like using, but I just popped that on there as an example, as a really easy one. So my last thing for communicating for our students would be a blog or similar, and that could be a communication wall. It could be on Google Classroom, a Google Doc. You could use Blog Ed, Classroom Dojo or Shobi. Again, I'm sure there are many, many more online platforms that different schools use, and that may be just another way that the student might be able to communicate with the teacher, possibly the parents if that was appropriate, as to the students' needs, how they're going, you know, anything else that they would need to share. So at this point in time, I would love to open up the forum to, we have so many people in this session. I'm sure these ideas are not the be all and end all, and I'm sure that people have some fantastic ideas, and I would love for us to share them. So please don't be shy. You could write it in the chat. You could put your hand up, we'll speak to you, or unmute yourself and speak. We'd really love to hear any other great ideas that you're doing before we move on to the second part of our session today. Anyone? No,
Hi Natalie, it's Christine here.
Oh, hi. Hello.
Sorry. Great ideas for everything. Mine isn't as innovative as yours, but one of my students who's now in year 2, so every year he speaks to each kindergarten class and goes in and chats with them, makes himself known and becomes a little superstar actually, with all the kindy students coming up to him and telling them his name, telling them, you know, their names. And it's just a great way, because knowledge is power, I always say to him, and it's lovely for all of the students. So by the time he gets to year 6, every student will have been informed So anyway, not as exciting as all your things.
No, all ideas are excellent ideas. I love them. That's what we're here for.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. I really
All right.
appreciate it.
Hi, it's Kim, everybody.
Hi,
I
Kim.
just wanted to share with you a website which is h5p.org, which actually goes through an accessibility of lots of the school-based apps and things, and actually checks how accessible they are and if they're screen reader accessible, if they're partially accessible. It sort of has a green light for go, a sort of orange light, and a red do not touch sort of one. I just thought it might be good to share. If I can get the website up, I'll share it in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. And just reading quickly over the chat, just scrolling through. Sam Neal, fantastic idea. She says, I love the QR code idea for casual teachers. And that's, you know, it's always an issue with casual teachers, I think. Communication gets lost. The student quite often does not want to share with the casual teacher as they walk in the room. So even putting, you know, they usually get a day sheet. If the school can put that QR code sticker on the day sheet, amazing. Okay, is anybody else want to share, or shall we move on?
Yeah, hi, it's Peter Edwards.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for all the tips, they're fantastic. A couple of years ago, I was at a small school and I had a Year 5 student who I was transitioning to Braille. And fortunately, the way my timetabling worked out, I only had a short travel to my next school. So I actually stayed at recess, and my student and I and a couple of his friends started a Braille club. And what we would do is we had some of the equipment there, and we'd actually invite the kids from the school to come in and test these things out. And kids, obviously, we all know, like, especially the younger kids in the primary schools and that, they love Braille and anything to do with that. So it got to the stage where at one stage, we had between a quarter and half the kids of the school coming in, and we had a roster. And I just was able to stand back, and my student and his friends actually ran it. And it was just a great thing for the school and for my student. And he was quite a confident kid. So it was just a really great thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And how empowering for that student. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I had I've got a school that's got a couple of vision impaired students in it, and I had one son in kindergarten, and the older boy was in about Year 10, and he came through and came down and mentored him once a week and played games in soccer with them in the playground and went to computers with them. And it was a pretty fabulous little program we ran, because he was a pretty cool kid, the boy from senior school. And it was a really good way to just introduce my little kindergarten boy to school and to feel part of the group immediately. And of course, all the kids followed the big boy around. And that was just a nice little way. And the advocacy skills of my little boy have developed quite quickly, I think, from the modelling from the senior student.
Fantastic.
Tied into Duke of Ed as well.
Oh, lovely. Okay, so thank you, Kim. You've posted the website on the chat, h5p.org, accessible content for apps in classrooms. Okay, well, we'll keep moving on if that's okay. We will have more time at the end, but I'm very aware that everyone's giving up their Saturday evening, so we'll keep going. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide, please, Claire. Okay, so the second part of our presentation is communicating for us as colleagues. And again, our communication is so important, and we're going to look at effective communication with all people's styles. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I think that, you know, a lot of our role as teachers, vision teachers, we communicate daily with teachers, execs, counsellors, external agencies, families, students, school learning and support officers, admin staff. To be able to do it effectively is so important. And I think, you know, it's winning half the battle as it is if you can communicate effectively. So with this diagram, even though your role description or title may not have a leader in it, I think we are leaders all within our own right. In the schools that we go into, we lead groups of teachers and guide groups of teachers about the students at that school and about that student's needs. And we want to keep those cogs turning. And if we're not communicating effectively, then those cogs stop turning. So we're going to look today at a model. Next slide, please. We're going to look at the people styles model. So it can also be known as the social styles model. I find this very, very fascinating because it is about human characteristics. It's based on the research by Dr. David Merrill and Roger Reed. And they found out that, which we know, people are more predictable than we think. And they found out that people have 4 distinct communication styles. And they found that the most effective communicators in the world are people that can identify the people style of the person they're dealing with and then adapt their own approach and communication style accordingly. So I think everybody's got, you know, a situation where you've been in a school, you've been talking to a group of teachers and you're connecting with some and you think, oh, they're getting it. They're understanding the students' needs. They're interested. This is great. And then there's some where you're feeling they're not getting it. They're not listening to me. They're just, why are they not getting it? And you think, was I not clear? You know, why they're not listening to me? So I think we've all had that happen. So next slide, please. We're going to look at what we need to know. So we all behave differently in different situations with different people. So this model identifies each individual's most common tendencies and preferences. And this is about behaviour, patterns and habits. It's not about your personality. And the styles that we're about to explore, they're an explanation, they're not an excuse. So it's not about, oh, well, that person's a different people style to me, so I can't communicate with them, or I'm never going to be able to communicate with them because they're that style. We really have to look at the focus being on identification of the other person's people style, and then flexing our own style, adapting our own style to be able to communicate effectively and get our message across clearly. So people are all different and diversity.
Do you believe that you adapt to different people's styles of communication? You do that well?
Sorry, is that a question to
Ashley?
me?
Oh, sorry, no.
So people are different. The diversity is the strength and the differences make the difference. So it's important to have people from all people's styles. Okay, next page, please.
Just before we do, can we just make sure everyone's on mute? Could Carol make sure she's on mute as well, please?
Okay, so what did Merrill find? So Merrill found that we tend to move along 2 lines of difference. So there is a line of assertiveness and a line of responsiveness. So assertiveness is how people engage others to varying degrees, and responsiveness is how much people show emotions to varying degrees. So next slide, please. Okay, so the first line is the line of assertiveness. So assertiveness is the degree to which a person's behaviour is seen by others as direct or forceful. So down the left-hand side of the arrow, you're less assertive, and to the right-hand side, we've got more assertive. Now, there's a couple of characteristics under each end. So the less assertive style, you would tend to have less intense eye contact, you'd speak less often, perhaps less confrontational. And then you've got on the more assertive end of the scale, you have more intense eye contact, you'll speak more often, decide more quickly. And okay, next slide. And then we have responsiveness. So this is the other line that people tend to move between. So we have up the top, which is the less responsive style. So people that show less emotion. And then we have down the bottom is the more end. So people who tend to show more emotion. So on the less responsive style, we have people that are less disclosing of feelings, appear more reserved, gesture less often, they use facts and logic more. And then the people in the more responsive style, they express feelings more openly, they appear more friendly, they're comfortable with small talk, and they may use more stories. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, I'm a bit of both, and that's absolutely correct. So if we can have the next slide, please. All right, so when you cross these two lines over, Merrill found that there are 4 distinct quadrants, and people tend to fit into one of these styles. So starting at the top right, we've got the people that show less emotion but are more assertive tend to fit into the driving style. We've got underneath that, the people who are more assertive and show more emotion fall into the expressive style of communicating. Then we have to the bottom left, people who show more emotion but are less assertive fit into the amiable style. And then people who in the top left, people who are less assertive and less emotion are more the analytical style. And it's really important to think, if you've sort of looked at this and said, oh, I'm definitely that style, what's interesting to note is that the person or the style that you will find it most difficult to communicate is the style diagonally opposite. So if you are an expressive style of communicator, you will find it most difficult to communicate with an analytical style. And if you are an amiable style, you'll find it most difficult to communicate with the driving style. Okay, next page, we're going to look at some characteristics. Okay, so characteristics of the 4 styles. So we'll start with the driving in the top right. So these people tend to be confident, assertive, may appear distant. They often look busy, move fast, and show little facial expression, and they get to the point. They don't like any fluff. The expressive style, they tend to be outgoing, warm, and confident. They tend to talk a lot and display their emotions. And they're not self-conscious. They use lots of gestures, colour, and fast movements. The people in the amiable style, they're friendly, relaxed, quiet, and they're quite a team player. They have open facial expressions, and they're often a really good listener. They have slower movements, and they can be calming in their voice and their presence. And then there's the analytical style, and they are quiet, organised, and dignified. They move slower but with precision. Little facial expression, they may appear withdrawn, but they're really into the facts. They want the facts presented. Okay, now again, if at this point you're looking at this and you think, oh, well, I fit into like a few different styles, that's absolutely correct, but everyone tends to have one dominant style. Okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, everyone has a dominant style. So how can you find out your style? So I have a survey, which due to time constraints, we can't actually all do the survey online whilst now, but you will be receiving this survey in your resource pack, and it contains 18 multiple choice questions. You then receive like a little answer sheet where you count up how many of each one you get, and it will tell you which is your people style. Okay, so next slide, please. So here's the key, or what is the key? The key is for effective communication is that you have to flex to the max. So you have to identify the style of person or the people style of the person you are interacting with, plus adapt your approach and communication style accordingly, and that should give you effective communication. Okay, next slide. So how are you going to do that? Well, there are strategies for communicating with all of these styles. So we're going to look just at a few dot points for each of the following people styles, and hopefully that will give us an idea. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you would like to communicate with someone who is a driving style, you have to be clear and to the point. You have to present the key facts, provide clear choices, highlight the success and failure probability, don't waste their time, don't try to be their friend or bring the emotional side into the conversation, and refer to the objectives and the success of the project to motivate them. And if possible, appeal to their ego. Okay, next style, please, next slide. If you are trying to communicate with the expressive style, you must plan your communication or meeting with the purpose of the bigger picture or the dream in mind. If you can make connections and links with the big picture and the why, that will be effective. Be succinct with what is being communicated and ask for their opinion. Encourage them to make connections with the ideas. Be personal and fun, yet hold to account for getting things done and getting outcomes. Next slide, please. If you would like to communicate with the amiable style, you can start the communication with a personal chat. How was your day or how was your weekend? Be supportive and show you care. Be casual and informal where appropriate. Show interest in personal goals. Encourage initiative. Define their contribution in writing if you can, and conclude with assurances. Okay, next slide, please. And lastly, if you'd like to communicate with someone of the analytical style, it's really good to prepare your content in advance, present the facts, and ensure that the facts are correct. Don't bluff your way through answering their questions. If you don't know, tell them. Leave personal comments and opinions out of the conversation. Answer the questions clearly and thoroughly. Ensure the information is from reliable sources. Give them time to evaluate and be direct and confident. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the takeaway challenge. So you will receive, and I think Emma from Safe Site will email this to you possibly tomorrow or Monday, a People Styles pack. So in it, you'll have this PowerPoint. I'm not precious. I'm happy for anyone to use this if you would like to, or get any ideas you would like from this. You'll receive the People Styles survey and the things that you need to take the survey yourself. You'll receive strategies for communicating with all people styles. So in a little bit more depth to what we've just sort of quickly gone through, and an action plan. Because obviously if you're communicating with a style, perhaps you just want a plan that's going to give you 1 or 2 dot points of how to communicate with that style. I'd really love for you to test it out. I'd love for you to identify a colleague, perhaps in a team or a school that you go into. I'd like you to try and identify their style, and I'm quite sure that perhaps already you've been thinking, that person I work with is possibly that style. So identify the style and then try flexing your style. Try, you know, if they're in the amiable range, try communicating by saying, hey, how's your weekend? What did you get up to? You know, if it's not something you'd usually do. Flex your style and see how it goes. I'd love you to share it with your team. It's a great team building exercise. I think it really does make everybody aware of the different ways people communicate, and that, you know, there's something you can do. If you don't think the message is getting across, there's something you can do to see if it can be more effective. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this particular session, this PowerPoint. So I just moved, the next slide is just questions and thoughts. I'm happy for any questions on any of the topics that we've talked about today. And then if there's any other questions that anyone would like to ask, or we have a lot of professionals in this session. So if anyone has anything they'd like to ask anyone, I'm more than happy. You could put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak. So quiet.
Hey, it's Michelle Knight here. How are you doing?
Hi, Michelle. Good, thank you.
Hi, that was really, really interesting, and it's made me start to think as well around, this is more of a comment, but possibly would lead into a question, around how a communication, you know, I took it initially as just verbal communication that you were talking about, but I think then this extends, if I think about it a bit more, to whether some people like to even have texts in terms of their communication, or email, or whether they do like to have that verbal communication. And I think you could extend it to those different forms of communication rather than necessarily the verbal.
Yeah, I agree 100%, because I think a lot of the communication we do these days is via email, via text, and even with taking it further on from that, the way you correspond in an email can make a difference to the type, the people style that you're writing to. So yeah, I think it definitely does extend just beyond the actual face-to-face communication. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Jackie. I just wanted
Jackie.
to ask you, thank you for that information. I've put a comment in the chat, but I wanted to ask you as well, have you ever shared any of this with your students? I'm thinking about how much they miss non-verbal communication, and if this is a useful tool perhaps in just skilling them up a little bit more in terms of the responses that they might get from their teachers when they're trying to advocate for themselves. Is that something you've tried, and if so, how did it go?
I think that's a really great idea. I haven't tried it with any students. I think that there would definitely be some great things that we could share with particularly our high school students. And if it's okay with you, I'm definitely going to look into that because I've done it with my team and some of the schools, the teams of the schools I go into, but I haven't done anything with students. But I think there's definitely scope there to do that for sure.
Sorry, this is Caroline Paul, and
Hi.
I'm just wondering on that same sort of topic, our vision impaired students are often not very good at communicating confidently and well, and I'm just wondering if there's other people who've got ideas on how we upskill them in using all the communication strategies that they have. Because they often don't read. We need to, one of the things, so I am vision impaired as well, and one of the things that I realise is that they don't get eye cues of people's eyes and the finer details that people give as emotional. So I'm wondering how we can upskill them in reading at people's emotional communication, which everybody just gets.
Does anyone, there is so much knowledge in this room. Please don't be shy. Would anyone like to jump in?
Yeah, this is Deborah Goodsir. I've got two things that have worked in the past. Well, probably more, but two things I can think of at the moment. One was we actually got sighted kids to volunteer as life coaches. So we would have a life coaching session. It was in Year 7, but it could be at any time. Life coaches, and it was for a student who was blind, but again, it would work with anyone. So they would firstly tell him the gossip. So, you know, who's going out with who, or what's really, what the kids are finding interesting now, because we found that he didn't progress as everyone else did. He just stayed with whatever the last groovy thing was. So they told him what was groovy at the moment. And they also commented on his behaviour, and they said, this is what we see you doing, and, you know, while it's fine, it'd be better if you did it this way. And the other thing we do is a thing called 10 minutes with, and you need at least 2 other students, but it can be as many as you like. And so our student with the vision impairment just joins a group and observes, or, you know, listens. And so that way they learn the interactions. And we say 10 minutes and we say more than one, because if it's just one, it gets draining. And if it's more than 10 minutes, I mean, sometimes it naturally progresses to more than 10 minutes, but a child who's observing others gets really tired after that. So if you know it's going to be a 10-minute session, they can be doing anything. It could be handball, they could be having lunch, they could be, you know, in a particular class or whatever, but that 10 minutes with kind of teaches them how other kids interact with each other, and they learn the cues by listening to what the other kids are cued by. That's it.
Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate it. Some really good ideas there.
Great idea.
Hi, this is Kim. We did some kindergarten work with the whole class. So it started with just introducing our blind student. Well, actually, the whole class for the blind student to actually show him different objects so that they would bring their favourite toys in and practice sort of all of those West skills about how to describe the object that they're showing to him. And that actually developed into, we actually saw the children actually describing what they were doing in their game. So it extended over just that little 5-minute session at the beginning of class to actually in the playground, we would actually see that descriptive language even more so with the kids when they were working around the student. So even though we started on one sort of lesson, it actually extended out to actually support his communication and what the kindy kids were doing and explaining what they were doing. So they became more encompassed into what was happening around him, and he became more informed about what they were all doing. So it had really nice flow-on consequences for just a little class mini activity. Just another one.
Thanks, Kim.
Sometimes I've had, my students have had difficulty with understanding the tone of conversation, and sometimes teachers can be sarcastic and have a very stern voice, more using sarcasm with a big smile on their face. And sometimes I've had a couple of students who've been quite terrified by teachers with tough tones or harsh sounding tones when really they're joking around. So we've had to do some work. Firstly, I might talk to the teacher, but that's just understanding humour and trying to understand nuances of tone and get some other cues, not just using the tone. But it's just been something that a couple of my students have really struggled with. Thought I'd put it out there.
I think also too is specifically in high schools when there are such differences and also in behaviour, we're not just teaching them and telling them about all the good things that kids are doing, but all the other naughty things and why the kids are laughing at the back of the room, you know, so they can participate in those social things. I did have one school that it was quite unfortunate, but someone got hold of a spray can and did some large genitalia around the school, and all the kids were sniggering and laughing, and then we had to go down and explain what had happened, and he was just laughing his head off because he just got it and then got what everyone else was doing. So yes, do all the nice things and stuff, but I think it's sometimes funny and engaging to tell them all the naughty things that kids are doing too.
This is Deborah Goodser again. One really important thing I forgot to say about the things we did is that there were no teachers involved. Like, we actually had an exclusion zone. So teachers couldn't, if it was in a room, teachers or teachers' aides couldn't be in the room. And if it was outside, they had to be 20 metres away. So if they were concerned about, you know, the child being damaged in some way, they could observe from a distance, but they couldn't be close. And so the kids, you know, like our kids don't learn swearing and they don't learn all of that weird stuff that, you know, who's done what to whom, when. And we don't necessarily need to know that. So that's a really important point.
Definitely. Okay, anybody else have anything they would like to share? All right, well, almost 5:30, Saturday evening. So if there's I'll stay on here for a few minutes if there's anything anyone would like to talk about. Thank you so much for participating in the session. I hope that you've got something that you can take away from it. And yeah, you'll receive an email either tomorrow or Monday that will have the how-to guides for the technology and the people pack information. And I just encourage you to have a go. It's kind of fun to see what you come out as and to improve our communication. So thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.